Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Japan and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel a couple of times before. Now, the last review that I did on the channel involving this brewery appeared back in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, and this brewery is quite interesting because they have three different ranges of beer, and each of these different ranges covers a different part of the beer spectrum. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is from a range that hasn't been on the channel before, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a style that I very much enjoy, one that you will find every so often in Japan, but it's not all that common, but it does have a little bit of a twist to it that, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't had from a Japanese brewery before. And it's also one of this brewery's latest releases here in Japan too. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head a bit north of me here in Osaka, up toward the Tokyo region of Japan. We're going to go out to the west of the city to Yamanashi Prefecture, and to be specific, we're going to a little city called Kosuge, which happens to be home to Far Yeast Brewing. So this particular beer that we're looking at today comes from Far Yeast Brewing Offtrail brewing range, if I said that correctly. The beer itself is called Obedience. It comes in at 12.5% ABV, and this one is a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine. It's been aged in American bourbon barrels for 8 months from what I gather. So yeah, this should be quite interesting. We've had a couple of barley wines from Japan before, but I think this could well be the first barrel-aged one, if I'm not mistaken. The only other potential candidate for a barrel-aged one I could think would maybe come from Shiga Kogen beer. We've had many barrel-aged imperial stouts from those guys, but I don't think we've had a barley wine. Potentially the most well-known barley wines that I've had from Japan would be the El Diablo, and of course you've got the Untappd as well, which is a wheat wine from St. Gallen Brewery. Those are probably the two most accessible Japanese barley wines and wheat wines and things like that. But yeah, Isakado I've done a few over the years, but yeah, it's a style you will find every so often in Japan, but not overly common. But like I say, the Japanese craft beer scene is very good these days, and there are quite a few things out there. So if you do know any good Japanese barley wines that I should look at, then do let me know in the comment section below. But this is the first one I'm trying in a wee while, and certainly one of the first barrel-aged ones that I've had from a Japanese brewery here on the channel, like I said. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see how we go. My first look at one of the Offtrail brewing brand beers from Far Yeast Brewing as well. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Far Yeast Brewing before, and we will no doubt add a few more to that list at some point in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, province, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Japanese playlist along with a number of other things, and do make sure you check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well, because there are some very interesting things on the channel these days. And do check out my friend Nevitt Reagan over at Japanese Craft Beer Reviews as well. He's doing a lot of nice videos. You'll find that link in the video description below. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a wee bit about Far Yeast Brewing once again then. So, Far Yeast Brewing was originally founded back in 2011 as Nippon Craft Beer Incorporated, but they later changed their name to Far Yeast Brewing Company in late 2014. So originally the company were based mainly in the Tokyo area, and the founder is Shiro Yamada, who has a background in business, having worked in the finance sector, and he also worked as a consultant for a number of years as well. But they launched their Kagoa brand of beers in 2012, and these are Belgian style beers, and they launched the Far Yeast brand of beers in 2014 before they decided that they would use this as the main name for the company because they thought it was quite catchy. But they started off as a gypsy brewery, and they were brewing most of their beers at other breweries both inside and outside of Japan. I think they were brewing some stuff in Belgium as well, if I'm not mistaken. But in 2017, they opened up their own brewery in Kosuge in Yamanashi Prefecture, out to the west of Tokyo, and this brewery is known as the Genryu Brewery, which literally translates into English as headwaters, so the Headwaters Brewery. But they source their water from the Tama River, and as is often the case in Japan, they are very, very proud of their water source. If you know anything about the Shinto religion in Japan, that it's all about naturally beautiful places and pure water, nice forests, all of this kind of thing. So many Japanese companies are very proud of their ingredients and where they come from, and the water that goes into the beer is usually no exception to that. But a few months after opening this brewery, they opened their first restaurant and bar in Shibuya. This one is called Craft Beer and Bao, and then in 2019 they added a second restaurant called Yakiniku and Craft Beer Den in Atami, and then the following year in 2020 they opened the Beerholic restaurant down in Fukuoka in Kyushu. But that year they also moved their Shibuya restaurant to Gotanda and rebranded it as Far Yeast Tokyo Brewery and Grill. But they officially moved their headquarters as well over to the new Kosuge Brewery out of the city of Tokyo. But they also have a bar called Far Yeast Taiwan Craft Beer Gastropub, which you can find in Taipei. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out what year that opened. I'll need to look that up a little bit more, because there was nothing available. But then I couldn't find out either when they introduced the Offtrail brewing brand of beers, but I think that has been maybe since 2021 or something like that. It's definitely after they moved into their new brewery and changed the headquarters. But as of July 2024, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 280 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and this includes the Kagua brand of Belgian style beers, the Far Yeast Brewing beers, which seem to be the kind of lighter, more sessionable ones. Those are quite widely available in supermarkets, and then they've got the Offtrail brand of beers as well, which are the barrel ones. So you get barley wines, you get imperial stouts, and there's also a few kind of sour beers and wild ales and things like that in there as well. So yeah, Offtrail is their kind of barrel series of beers. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Far Yeast Brewing and the whole story behind them. If you do want to learn more, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a wee bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's go on and actually have a little look at this beer itself. So like I mentioned to you, this one comes in at 12.5% ABV. It's from the Offtrail range of Far Yeast Brewing. It's called Obedience. It's a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine. It's been aged in the barrels for 8 months, and from what I understand, it had a 10-hour wort boil, which is about what you want for a barley wine. And honestly, you do want a nice long wort boil, because it will give you those nice kind of leathery, caramelly flavours and things like that. You can see plain bottle cap on the top there. This one is a 350 milliliter bottle, if I'm not mistaken. And that's 330. I told you lies there. 330 milliliter bottle, which isn't that common in Japan actually. Usually they're 350s, and the cans are certainly 350s as well. But you can see on the side there is the Offtrail Brewing symbol, and like I said, it's one of the brands of Far Yeast. I'm surprised there's not something that marks this as a Far Yeast beer, in fact, because when I first encountered this. When I first encountered the Offtrail ones, I thought it was a different brewery actually. But yeah, let's get this guy out into the glass then and see how we go. I'm really, really curious about this. My first barley wine from Japan in quite some time. So let's do this. There you are, look at that. So, I think that's everything out of there. We don't want to waste it. So yeah, before the head disappears on this one then, you can see that the beer poured with about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would say kind of fawn coloured head. That is of course just fading away to a very thin foamy layer, which you'd expect of a beer at this ABV, but you can see nice kind of medium bubbles, maybe smaller bubbles actually, medium to small size bubbles on the surface of the liquid there, and then it gets a little bit foamier the further up that you go. But yeah, just leaving that little thin foamy layer over the top of the beer, then you've got that nice kind of thicker ring around the edge But yeah, the colour of this beer is quite interesting. It's a lovely sort of dark chestnut, I would say. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. First is the type of malts that you use in the beer. That goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or adjuncts you put into the beer will affect its colour as well. And when it comes to brown beers like barley wines, the barrel can play a significant role in determining the colour of the beer. That's just how it goes. So yeah, the colour of this one is a little bit darker than some other barley wines that I've encountered before. There's a few ways you can play with the barley wine style. You can do a double mash if you really want to, which is going to give you that big, sticky, kind of chewy mouthfeel. You can do a longer wort boil, and that's going to give you, more kind of dry, sort of dry, leathery, brown sugary sort of flavours. And then, yeah, you can also do different kinds of barrel aging and things. So, cognac barrel aging, rum barrel aging, all of these sorts of things can be very, very interesting when it comes to the barley wine style. So going by the colour of this one, you can see this one is quite dark. You will get barley wines that are a bit brighter than this. The colour of this one probably is due to the longer wort boil and potentially a bit to the malt types and barrel aging. So all things in this are playing all factors in this one are playing a bit of a role. But you can see there's one or two bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass there. You can see a few coming up toward the surface of the beer, but all in all it looks very, very nice, I have to say, and pretty much what you would expect of a barley wine, but certainly one of the darker examples I've seen over the last wee while. I don't think we need to say anything more about the appearance of this beer. Let's have a wee look at the aroma then and see what it has in store for us. I'm very, very curious about this one. That smells really good. I'm going to say straight away, aroma, this one's beautiful. Proper old school. And this is one of the things that I really like actually about the Japanese beer scene, and I guess we can say about the Asian beer scene in general. Quite often you will find beers that are a little bit nostalgic from the European or American perspective. Like, to me, this smells like some of the first barley wines that I reviewed on the channel, and I miss things like this because there's so much focus on the smoothie sours, the pastry stouts, the hazy IPAs these days. I miss old school stuff like this. So I'm going to say straight away to Far Yeast, they've got my approval with this one almost immediately, just with the smell of the aroma. This thing is beautiful. It gives you everything you'd want from a barley wine. You can smell the bourbon and the barrel in there, the big brown sugars, the fruits, the bread, everything. It's a beautiful smelling beer, this. And as you'll know if you've watched the channel for any length of time, I'm a big sucker for the big brown sugary beers, like the Scotch ales, the Doppelbocks, the Belgian quadruples, and the American barley wines. I love these kind of beers. So this one is right up my street. With the barley wine as well, you need to remember there's kind of two varieties, or there's a few varieties of things. So the barley wine is essentially the big brother of the double IPA. Pale ale IPA, double IPA, and barley wine. These beers are all related to each other through their hop to malt ratios. So the barley wine is essentially the first take on a triple IPA, but of course we have triple and quadruple IPAs these days, which I think use the hop to malt ratio of the double IPA, but they just make them more high in alcohol, of course. But yeah, there's two variants of the barley wine. The English barley wine and the American barley wine. The English ones tend to be a little bit more kind of toasty and have more dry fruity character, whereas the American ones are a little bit more sort of oily and sweet, and then the fruits are just a little bit more kind of ripe almost. But yeah, you've got other variants there as well, such as the wheat wine, which I think has about 30 to 40% wheat in its malt base, the same with the rye wine as well, whereas the barley wines tend to be all barley malt, hence the name. So yeah, those are some things to think about when it comes to this beer style. But anyway, let's go back to the aroma of this one. So the backbone of the beer is that lovely smooth American oak. As I've said on the channel many a time, American oak is a different species of tree to the European oak, and I think it gives you more of a kind of smooth character. The European oak is just that little bit drier. So lovely smooth American oak in there, quite a wee bit of vanilla. You can smell the sweetness of the American bourbon as well. American bourbon for me is quite interesting because it has a little bit of a bite to it, but then it's also very, very sweet actually. I love American rye whiskey, in all honesty. It can be very, very nice. But yeah, the malty backbone of this beer is lovely. So above the kind of sweet bourbon layer, there's a rye bready bread crust, big oily sweet rye bread in there, some wholemeal brown bready character as well. Yeah, wholemeal brown bready character, sweet rye bread in there. Then you've got all the brown sugars in this one, and the brown sugar has a lot of complexity to it. So there's some toasty brown sugar in there. So yeah, nice toasty brown sugar. There's some nuttiness in there, leathery brown sugar as well, which is obviously from the wort boil. You know, I think 10 hours of a wort boil, it's decent, but I think, you know, some breweries will do 24 hours and things like that. They'll let the wort boil for that long, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, the wort boil in this one, you can smell that lovely kind of mix. You've got the toasty brown sugar in there, the more leathery brown sugar as well. You've got straight up sweet caramel, maybe a little bit of a treacle molasses type note in there as well. Then you've also got some nice kind of biscuity, you know, McVitie's digestive biscuity notes too. There's a whole host of complexity within that brown sugary character, but yeah, you get more and more nuttiness out of this one as well. But yeah, your bready notes are very interesting because it's almost like a kind of brandy soaked fruit rye bread type thing. So yeah, some quite a little bit of a kind of cakey fruit loaf type character coming out of this beer. So it gets a big thumbs up from me. I really like how this one kind of pieces together. The way everything just goes together in the malty side of this beer is really nice. The yeasty side of this one in the back of the nose, you can smell quite a little bit of brown bread and some cracker and stuff, but we will of course get more of the yeasty character in the flavour part of the video. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things, you do have quite a little bit of green component to this one, and again, this one comes across as being quite old school, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is something like, you know, Cascade, Williamette, yeah, wouldn't be surprised if it's like Cascade, Williamette, or like, you know, Chinook or something like that in here. There is something that's very, very familiar about this. But your green component, there's a little touch of earthiness in there. You can get a little hint of kind of pine resiny character in there, some floral aromaticity, and also a good little bit of a kind of grassy, zesty note out of the beer too. Because remember, barley wines are pretty heavily hopped. Obviously, you can keep these beers and age them for a little bit. The hoppy character will gradually drop out, of course. But yeah, the way that goes together is quite nice in this one. The fruity side of the beer is what you would expect as well. So for me, there's yeah, for me, there's a little bit of it's mostly red fruit actually. So there's a bit of plum in there. I don't know if I'd say raisin. There's, yeah, no, there is a bit of raisin, to be honest. You have got that little bit of dry raisiny character out of it. You've got plum, dates definitely, figs for sure, black currant. Yeah, black currant. I don't know if I'd say blackberry right enough. It doesn't seem quite sharp enough for that. But a lovely mix of, you know, juicy, fruity character coming out of this beer. So yeah, the way everything pieces together in this beer is really, really nice, and the aroma, like I said, is really nostalgic for me. It reminds me of some of the really old school barley wines that I've had over the years. Reminds me a little bit of OO Brewing's long boil barley wine from Gothenburg in Sweden. Really enjoyed that one. So yeah, as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, but I think this one's going to be good. So this one is Obedience, a 12.5% bourbon barrel-aged barley wine from the Offtrail range from Far Yeast Brewing in Kosuge, Yamanashi Prefecture near Tokyo here in Japan. Let's get stuck into this one. Sláinte, skål, cheers, kanpai. That is nice. That's a well done beer. Yeah, it's interesting, this one, because it's quite sweet in the beginning, and it gives you a wee bit more of a dryness into the aftertaste, actually. But again, it's a proper old school barley wine, this one. So yeah, it's always interesting too to see how these beers come out, because you know the craft beers obviously are designed for the Japanese palate here, and quite often you will find that Japanese craft beer, it has the flavour you expect, but it's just a little bit lighter in its mouthfeel and things like that. And that's a wee bit of the impression I get from this beer too. It's not quite as thick in its mouthfeel as you might find from you know, a European or an American take on the style, but it's still very good. You do have to remember as well though that when you barrel age any beer, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel for these more kind of infused flavours. So yeah, that's worth thinking about here too. But they've done a very, very solid job of this, so it's a big thumbs up from me. This is a really, really good barley wine. If you like this style, you will enjoy this one. So let's do as we always do. We'll break it down and describe the flavour for you a little bit more in depth. So yeah, for me, the backbone of this beer, if we go to the middle third of the palate first, as we often do, the backbone of the beer, you can feel that nice, smooth, American oaky character coming out of this one. So, as you move further forward on that oaky character there, you can feel the little bit of vanilla in the base, and then you've got the American bourbon just sitting on top of that. As I've said before, American bourbon for me, it has a little bit of a bite to it, but it's quite sweet in its aftertaste compared to Scotch whisky, which has a bit more of a dry sweetness in its aftertaste. So yeah, you can feel the bourbon brown sugar in there, which is a little bit more, it's quite bright, as I say, but then above that you get the kind of rye bready bread crust, which feels a little bit toasty actually. That does give you a little bit more dryness into the aftertaste too. So yeah, you've got the toasty rye bready bread crust in there. You have the, so yeah, toasty rye bready bread crust. Then you've got a more dense and sweet rye bready character coming out of the beer too. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is very, very nice. And then above the kind of the more dense and sweet oily rye bready there, you get a little bit more of a kind of wholemeal brown bready layer as well. For me, the wholemeal brown bread actually has a wee bit of dryness to it and a little bit of graininess. So yeah, you get the more dense oily rye bread, the wholemeal brown bread in there, and then you've got the brown sugars above that. So you've got that nice toasty dry brown sugar in there. So yeah, nice toasty dry brown sugar, and then above that you can feel you've got this more kind of oily circle in the middle of your palate there. So that's where you start to get the kind of leathery side of the brown sugar. So you get the toasty brown sugar underneath, the leathery brown sugar. Then as you move into that, you've got a sweeter sort of caramel note. You've also got a bit of a kind of Werther's Original butter candy butterscotch, but the dead centre of your palate there, you have the kind of treacle molasses type quality that comes out of this one. So yeah, I really like how that pieces together for sure. But yeah, the treacle molasses note in the dead centre of your palate's great. Then you've got a wee bit of, as I say, as you move further out from that, Werther's Original butter candy butterscotch, the sweet caramel, and the more leathery brown sugar. I'd say there's a little bit of an almost McVitie's digestive biscuity note just kind of sprinkled on top of that. And you will feel that further forward on that middle third palate, you get a little touch of nuttiness coming out of the beer. Quite a dry nuttiness at that, I would add as well. So yeah, that is the middle That's the middle third of your palate in this beer. Yeah, quite interesting, I have to say. So, on the yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about that. Let's go to the back third of your palate then. So, the border region between the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get that little bit of bready build up in there, so you can feel the kind of rye bread in the base and the wholemeal brown bread on top of that, and then a wee bit of toasty brown sugar on the top, quite dry actually. But then yeah, the base of that back third of your palate, you can feel the bourbon barrel in there is a little bit drier, of course. Then you've got the bourbon there, which feels a little bit more kind of bitey and things. The rye bready bread crust feels a bit more toasty and dry. The rye bready character above that feels a little bit lighter, more airy and taller, of course. Then the kind of wholemeal brown bready character above that is a little bit, again, lighter, more airy and taller, but again a bit drier. Then you can feel the more dry, leathery side of the brown sugar just kind of creeping over the top of that. As I've often said, the back third of your palate is going to give you very similar flavours to the middle third of your palate, just at different intensities. And do remember that sweeter flavours tend to come out further forward, more dry and bitter flavours come out further back. But yeah, the yeasty side of this beer, on top of that, the yeasty side of this beer for me, you have in the centre, I think you've got a more dense and dry rye bready character. Then around the edge, you have a little bit more of a you've got a bit more of a kind of wholemeal brown bready character, then some toasty bread crust. Yeah, then some more kind of toasty bread crust around the edge of that too. So that's quite interesting, I would say. Yeah, for me, I'd say yeah, the yeasty side of this one, rye bread in the middle, a more wholemeal brown bread, and then more toasty bread crust, and all of that sits on top of that back third of your palate. So definitely, yeah, the back third of your palate, the flavour is taller. Then as you move further forward into the middle third of your tongue, it condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. And yeah, I do like how that pieces together. So let's move on to the hoppy and the fruity side of the beer then. But the malty and yeasty side of this one, I think, is pretty nice actually. But it's definitely one of the kind of toastier barley wines that I've had, and it's got a bit more dryness to it as well, which is interesting. Yeah, so hoppy side of things then, you can still feel quite a bit of green component in this beer. Obviously you could age it more and that would drop out, but yeah, it would drop out even further. So in the back corners of the palate, you do have that little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, you get a little touch of kind of herbal character, but yeah, further forward from that, you can feel there's a little touch of like pine resin underneath, and then you start to get more and more floral aromaticity and slight spiciness as you reach the kind of front corners of your palate. So that's there. Then round the front curve of your tongue, it's a little bit lighter and more grassy. There's still a little touch of zestiness to it there, but yeah, not too much. But mainly floral and slightly piney resinous, I would say, this beer into the aftertaste. But let's look at the front third of your palate then, on the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a nice little bit of bready build up in there, so you can feel the rye bread in the base, the wholemeal brown bread on top of that, then a wee bit more of the kind of toasty brown sugar. But the base of that front third of your palate, you've got the nice, yeah, you can feel you have that nice sort of wood. You've got the woody, the oaky woody character underneath there, which again is very, very smooth. You've got a little bit of the bourbon brown sugar as well, and then above that you have the kind of rye bready bread crust, the rye bread, the wholemeal brown bread. Then you've got the sweeter side, like the leathery brown sugar and the sweet caramel. Then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll the way out of the beer. So again, yeah, I quite like how that goes together. So yeah, let's look at the fruity side of the beer then. So for me, the fruity side of this one, at the back of that front third of your palate, you can feel there's a little touch of that. There's a little touch of that stronger grapefruity note in this one. So yeah, you've got that little bit of grapefruity character in there. Then on top of that, you can feel there's a bit more of a kind of juicy, plummy character for sure. Bit of raisin too, I would say. So yeah, there's plums, there's raisin. Underneath all of that, you've got a little bit of a datey type note to the beer as well. So yeah, plums, raisin, dates. As you move further forward into the middle of that front third of your palate, you've got a little bit of a kind of figgy note, and then yeah, further forward from that, there's a little bit of like black currant. I think the front half of that front third of your tongue is all about like black currants. So yeah, nice black currant note and a little bit of maybe a very slight touch of blackberry in there as well. So the fruity side of this beer is nice, yeah. Figs, raisins, plums, bit of grapefruit, which is obviously, I think that I'm pretty sure it's like Williamette, Cascade, and Chinook or something like that that's in here. Does feel very much like that, proper old school this one, but yeah, a bit more of a black curranty and figgy note into the aftertaste. But all in all, very, very nice barley wine this one. I think you will like it. So yeah, don't think we need to say much more about the flavour of this one in all honesty. The only other thing I would add is that into the aftertaste you get more of the bread crust and the nuttiness and the leathery brown sugars lingering there. But yeah, let's round off this review then with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So for me, this beer, it is a little bit more, it's a little bit more, it's bottom end of full bodied, I would say. Carbonation is quite smooth. It's got a wee bit more dryness to it than I thought it was going to have. But yeah, nice kind of oily slickness at the same time. In terms of the IBU, it's a bit hard to place in all honesty. Don't know if it says anything about that on the bottle. But yeah, the IBU is a little bit hard to place in this beer. I just noticed as well it says best before 2029. Which is kind of interesting. But yeah, it does have a little bit more bitterness to it, maybe 60-ish IBUs, but obviously the longer you keep this beer, the more that bitterness is going to drop out. The malt, as we said, it's a bit of dryness underneath, smoothness in the middle. You've got that dry sweetness on top, and a wee bit of, I'd say a little bit of dryness from the yeasty character in this one too. Then you've got that nice oily, fruity character coming out of it. All in all, really, really nicely done beer, this one. And a proper old school barley wine, but leaning more towards that drier, sweeter end of the spectrum actually. It almost reminds me a wee bit of the sherry that my gran used to drink in a sense. But yeah, I like that with this one. Really, really good beer and a very good first impression of the Offtrail range from Far Yeast Brewing. So yeah, give these beers a try if you get the chance. We'll need to see what else I can find from these, from this particular range. But yeah, that's everything I think we need to say about this one. This was the Obedience, a 12.5% bourbon barrel aged barley wine from the Offtrail range by Far Yeast Brewing in Kosuge in Yamanashi Prefecture near Tokyo here in Japan. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Far Yeast Brewing as well, and also from the Offtrail range of beers. And we will see about returning to these guys again very soon. Do let me know some other Japanese barley wines that I should look at as well, because I'd be very curious to see what other ones are out there. Thank you for watching. Check out my social media, check out their social media, and I'll see you guys in another review very, very shortly. Slange, skål, cheers, and kampai.